I want to talk about cousin marriage, because I don't think in 15 years on LBC I've ever covered this subject. But it's got in the news today because the White House has attacked Keir Starmer over his government's refusal to ban cousin marriage. Sarah Rogers, Donald Trump's free speech czar, said Labour's failure to back legislation outlawing the practice was an example of civilisational concern. Not quite sure what first cousin marriage has got to do with free speech, but there we go. Now, first cousin marriage, which is particularly prevalent among South Asians, is legal in Britain, but increases the risk of children having genetic disease. And I think we all know that, don't we? I mean, if you have interbreeding within families over generations, then you just know that there could well be problems with the children of any sort of relationship. That's why incest is outlawed in this country. But first cousin marriage is not. I'd love it. Well, we may well hear some arguments for it in the course of this hour, but it's not something I've ever studied particularly, but I do wonder why that people get so strongly het up about this. And surely it doesn't matter what community you're from, whether it's South Asian community or not, that the biological elements of this do not change. If you have interbreeding, then clearly, and I'll read out some of these statistics later on, but I've got the evidence here that shows what the effects can be. Well, Richard Holden is joining me in the studio, Conservative MP and Shadow Cabinet Minister. He's been campaigning for first cousin marriage to be banned in England. Richard, why do you feel so strongly about this?
This is something I heard about a couple of years ago. And I introduced a private member's bill when I was not in the shadow cabinet about it. Basically, just to say, look, this is something that it's pretty clear to me that for three reasons, really. First of all, you've already mentioned the health concerns, and there are multiple studies which show that there are really serious health concerns, particularly when first cousin marriage it isn't like a one-off in multiple generations, but when it happens generation after generation after generation. I think the second thing is it's pretty clear that this is a real issue around freedom, right? You are not free if to have a normal relationship if you share the same grandparents as the person you're in a relationship with, right? You can't walk away in the same way because you're not just walking away from a friendship group; you're walking away from your own family. So actually, what it actually has done is over years becomes a sort of clan mentality, and it really traps people in. And that's a particular issue, which is the third point around women's rights, because there really is that real concern that actually what you're seeing is property and all sorts of other things being held by family groups, not allowing individual rights, not allowing individual choice, and with all of those issues around the health concerns that have been mentioned. Look, it's a private member's bill I brought forwards. It's something that and it's something that the Prime Minister decided at Prime Minister's questions a few months ago to basically not support my private member's bill on it, and do so very publicly, and sort of slapped me down, which is a video which has been going around a lot online. I think that was a mistake from the Prime Minister. I think it's a mistake from the government not to look at this. This is a practice, particularly in certain British Pakistani communities, certain parts of the British Pakistani community, from certain parts of historically from certain parts of Pakistan, and also there are also to a lesser degree issues within the traveller community as well, where this has become an issue, and I really do fear when you're seeing in the general population roughly around 1 in 400 marriages is between first cousins. Within parts of the British Pakistani community, this was as high as over 50%. Over 50% in parts of Bradford and other parts of the country, which means that this isn't a small issue. This is an issue that's been going on a long time and isn't properly being tackled. I'd go further than that and to say I actually think that the state is to a degree being a bit complicit with elements of this, and has gone far too far down the cultural relativism line. I have seen NHS documents which say, let's examine the benefits of first cousin marriage I don't think the state should be doing that. I think this is a real issue when the state takes cultural...
What could the benefits possibly be?
There are no benefits to first cousin marriage, in my view, right? They will say, well, and actually the Labour, the independent MP who opposed my 10-minute rule bill, which became the private members bill, talked about this, saying, he said it strengthened family bonds. It allowed finances to be kept within the family because...
what then have abolished the laws on incest between brothers and sisters?
That would be a logical conclusion of that. Yeah, I mean we do have incest laws in the UK, and actually the truth is on first cousin marriage, right? First cousin marriage was actually bizarrely banned all the way until Henry VIII in the UK, and it's only because he wanted to marry, I think, his cousin's sister or cousin's first cousin or something like that. That's when the law was reversed.
Oh, and what happens in other countries?
Part of what kicked me off in thinking about this was I was speaking to some politicians from some other countries in Europe and Norway have just banned first cousin marriage a couple of years ago. Sweden are doing the same. I was speaking to a Danish politician. In fact, I'm having a meeting with him next week to talk about, because they're looking at doing it in Denmark as well. In fact, in Denmark, they basically say if you're marrying somebody from your family, then it's automatically treated as if it's a forced marriage if they're being brought in from abroad, which is, I think, again, something we should be looking at in the UK as part of a broader look at this, because I think it's a real issue. It's a real issue, I think, as well, when you're seeing some communities who are very, very separate from the rest of the country. The reason it was banned in the first place, or it was pushed away from, is because it was interestingly in the early Roman Catholic Church in the UK. Obviously before the split in the early hundreds, in the sort of Dark Ages, ended up with a ban on any marriage up to, I think it was fifth cousins. Basically, it was almost, there's a lot of interesting academic work on this. Matthew Said's written a lot about it in the Times about how it's almost the foundation of the nation state, because actually what you need, if you're not able to marry within your family, within your clan, all you've got to do is you've got to have trust relationships and legal relationships beyond the family. And actually, that's a really important thing here. And that's why I feel this is such a damaging and an anti-British thing to have so prevalent in parts of our country, because it's not in line with those traditions which had emerged over a very, very long period of time.
People pointing out on a text here, Adam says, Jewish people marry first cousins, and Cheryl says, why are you all scared to mention Arabs who marry first cousins?
I'm not scared to mention anybody. I mean, the truth is that the prevalence rates, and this is where there's public, documented information, are much higher. And actually, interestingly, a few years ago, it was much higher than average amongst the Bangladeshi community in Britain. But that's actually fallen off the edge of a cliff. So actually, it's been very particular amongst some of the amongst the communities I've mentioned.
But I'm sure you've had criticism you mentioned the independent MP, who's one of the sort of Muslim
Gaza
MPs.
independents,
yeah.
Yes, as they call them.
Have you? People will no doubt say, "Oh, well, you're just having another go at Muslims." Typical conservative.
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear. I think this is a bigger issue than this is. I think this goes beyond that. This is a real concern about the community. In fact, what I want to do is I want to be there, and I've had actually contact. As soon as I talked about this, exactly as you suggested, people did get in touch with me. But a lot more people, particularly younger men and women from inside the Muslim community, particularly in places like Bradford, I've got emails from them. Right? They were emailing, I'm not their MP. They were saying, please don't let this go. Please push this. People in my community are being forced. And the crucial thing about this, YouGov polling has been done on this. So the polling has been done even within the British Muslim community, even within the British Muslim community in the Pakistani community. There is a majority against it. Right, there is a majority against it. But the truth is that these voices, the voice of the people, are being crowded out, and the government is just not willing to take on what they see as a culturally sensitive issue. I don't see it as a culturally sensitive issue. I think it goes to the core of individuals' rights, of women's rights, and I think broader issues around health in our society.
Richard, thank you very much for coming in. That's Richard Holden there, Conservative MP, who's been campaigning on this issue. Well, let's turn to Khalil Yousuf, who's from the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. Khalil, thank you very much for joining us. You've been listening to what Richard has said there. I mean, to me, it makes eminent sense to ban this. What's your view?
Well, I don't think it should be banned. And the reason I don't think it should be banned is because it affects a very small proportion of people. My understanding is that it only affects 1% of the population, not 99%. And I think that the fundamental thing for us
Richard
is to make sure that we preserve.
Sorry to interrupt, but Richard said in some areas in this country, among certain communities, it's 50%.
Well, I haven't seen the statistics, but I think the important thing is that we live in a democracy. We have a principle of liberty, and it's important that we champion liberty. We champion free choice. If we live in a liberal democracy, then laws should be there to exist to protect citizens from harm, not to regulate the private consensual choices that adults make. And as he rightly alluded to, this is not something that is just found in the Muslim community. In Judaism, in Protestant Christianity, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins. So, I don't think it's something that's isolated to one community. What I do think is that parliamentary time should be spent on dealing with other things that really impact our civilization. We have huge amounts of homelessness. We have widespread use of food banks. People are unable to pay their bills. Small businesses are struggling. Instead of spending valuable parliamentary time on focusing on this one narrow issue, which affects a very small minority of people, we really should be focusing on the things that affect the population as a whole. Some of the points that I've made: NHS, care workers, public servants.
But this, of course, because of the health effects or possible health effects from first cousin marriage, it puts, I'm not going to say a burden on the NHS, but it certainly means that, and I've got the statistics here, that people who are born through first marriages are more likely to need the NHS services because of the health defects.
So I looked at some of those statistics because your colleague sent me a Telegraph article, and it mentioned cystic fibrosis, and it also mentioned sickle cell. So I did some research before I came on to the program, and I discovered that cystic fibrosis is prevalent amongst 94% of white people, not ethnic minority communities that Richard Holden had mentioned. And I got that from the UK CF Registry 2022 annual report. I also looked at the prevalence of sickle cell, and that was highest in London, 1 in 970. I took that data from government reports in 2020, and actually a significantly lower number of cases in Midlands and the East. So he might mention that 50%. I haven't verified that. I haven't seen the source of that. But it doesn't correlate with the...
in people who are born through first marriages are about double that of children whose parents are unrelated, 6% versus 3%. I mean, you have to. I mean, that's from the Born in Bradford study. So, I mean, I would say that's quite a serious discrepancy.
I mean, you mentioned in your opening narrative about studying, and I thought that was a really important word. That's one research report that you've mentioned. I'm sure that is a viable research report, a good research report, but I'm sure there are others too. And I think it's important that we spend time looking at the facts, looking at the evidence, looking at how it really does affect the NHS, looking at what else affects the NHS. I mean, look, if we're talking about banning things that affect children that are born, what about alcohol? What about drugs? What about those other...
I'm sorry, but that's just whataboutery. What we're talking about here, and you would presumably agree with me that children should not be born through brothers and sisters. Incest is against the law in this country. Right. I mean, this is not quite so serious, but we know that it's to a degree it is a serious issue. So why wouldn't any responsible government try to address this?
Because I think we've already got legislation that deals with these risks.
Well, we don't. Forced marriage. That's the point.
You've got the Forced Marriage Civil Protection Act. You've got Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. You've got the Serious Crime Act, which deals with offences of controlling and coercive behaviour. There's lots of legislation that prevents any type of marriage or relationship, whether forced or otherwise. And so I don't think that we need to then have another piece of legislation which already deals with matters that are already addressed in legislation.
Richard Holden is still here. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, I just pointed back. I'm going to push back on a couple of points. The Born in Bradford study actually is, if anything, it's on the incredibly liberal side of the studies. The 3 versus 6%. There are many studies which fear that, one recently from Egypt, which says it could be 4 or 5 times as high. Actually, when you're talking about these genetic issues, I've got no issue with the people criticising Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. They got married almost 200 years ago. I don't want to live in a society which has these sort of same mores as we had 200 years ago. We also put gay people in prison 200 years ago, right? I think it's ridiculous. I think it's a bizarre argument to go down on. And as it comes to the idea of protecting liberties, which is what Khalid was talking about there. I think Khalil was talking about there. I thought was absolutely absurd. The idea that there shouldn't be barriers in this. I mean, does he not? What about consent? He talks about consenting adults. I mean, where would he draw the line?
Look, democracy works best when we solve problems, in a proportionate,
exactly what I'm trying to
evidence-based approach, and not when you're making symbolic prohibitions that restrict liberty.
I've looked into this over a year.
Hang on, let me finish, Mr. Holden. I would ask Mr. Holden to spend time on having private members' bills that address homelessness, that address the widespread use of food banks, the fact that people are unable to pay their bills, the fact that we have an economy that is broken because of the last government. So, I think really his time should be spent on focusing on the issues that affect real people.
Just because a government does one thing, that doesn't mean to say it can't do another.
No, but parliamentary time is valuable.
That's a very lazy argument, if I may say so.
No. Parliamentary time is valuable. And there are issues that are affecting people all across the country. Small businesses are struggling. NHS and care workers, we talk about NHS and how that's affected by this. What about supporting our NHS? What about supporting our
what about banning
care
first
workers?
Because of marriage, that would help.
That's what a civilized society does.
What a civilized society doesn't do is have incest and first cousin marriage causing huge amounts of problems.
Incest is already banned. Incest is already banned. Forced Marriage Act, Civil Protection Act in 2007 addresses forced marriage. You've got the Serious Crime Act 2015, which prevents controlling and coercive behaviour. What is it that you feel is happening that is not already addressed in law?
If you don't understand what I've said, then there are serious...
The truth is that there isn't anything that is not already addressed in law.
That's just not true.
The truth is also, hang on, Mr. Holden, the truth is also that it's, if you've got people like President Trump and others that are talking about influencing our democracy, I would ask them to look in their own countries. Florida, Arizona, Georgia,
totally
New York, California, all allow marriages between first cousins.
Okay.
Let's not have.
I'm not doing this on the. I think Khalil is misunderstanding where I'm coming from on this. I talked about this well over a year ago, before any involvement from any international groups at all. This was on the basis of reports I'd read from Norway and Sweden, where they were already looking at this. I mean, perhaps Khalil thinks the Norwegian and Swedish governments are illiberal totalitarian dictatorships for trying to ban first cousins from being married.
But I think that there are
if you don't, then why should we have it here then?
There are many issues that are affecting minority communities in this country. Muslim women being called letterboxes by Boris Johnson, all the way up until now, in which there are violence against Jews, against Muslims and other communities. Why are you not spending time addressing those issues?
Well, the very real issues that are affecting minority communities. I'll tell him what I did under the last when I was elected.
What are you doing now?
Well, if you let me speak, then I'll tell you. I banned so-called hymenoplasty virginity testing in the last Parliament by getting an amendment through on the Health and Care Act. Now, Khalil will say that's an issue. Let me speak, Khalil. That's an issue that only affects.
Khalil, would you please respect the rules of debate?
That's an issue, Khalil would say, which only affects a tiny number of people in this country, and he'd be absolutely right. But it's an abhorrent thing that should never have happened in this country. And so are the issues around first cousin marriage, where you're seeing women forced into these relationships, where you're seeing communities cut off from the rest of our society, and when you're seeing clan structures basically brought into this country. I think it's outrageous. I think we need to put a stop to it. And I think that Khalil, who seems to not have an issue with it being banned in Norway and Sweden, seems to have an issue with it being banned here. I can't understand what his arguments are at all.
It's precisely because under your government, the Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act made forced marriage a criminal offence.
We're not talking about forced marriage here. We're talking about sort of people who voluntarily get married as first cousins. It's nothing to do with forced marriage. Well, it can be in some circumstances, but
people are entitled, Iain, to choose.
Given that the Ahmadiyya movement is seen as one of the more liberal movements within the wider Islamic faith, I have to say I'm quite surprised by the vehemence of your argument here, which I might have expected from some other parts of the Muslim faith.
You will forgive me, Ian, but I think it's really important that we don't focus just on this narrow issue and the focus against
Well, you've made that point
Muslims
repeatedly, and I'm getting rather bored with hearing it. Thank you very much. Khalil, thank you. That's Khalil Yousuf from the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community.